snap. The kick is in the air, and the kick this time is no, sir-ree. No, sir-ree. Final score, Tennessee 20, Florida 17. Pandemonium reigns.
You're listening to the RTI Podcast, powered by RockyTopInsider.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the RTI Podcast. I am Nathaniel Rutherford, managing editor of RockyTopInsider.com, joined again by Ben McKee, our staff writer here at RTI. He's also, of course, the co-host and producer of the Swain Event morning radio show with Jason Swain, former Tennessee wide receiver. If y'all haven't listened to that show, you definitely should. It's 7 to 10 a.m. every single morning. And if you haven't got a chance to listen to any of the shows this week, I highly recommend Thursday's show. This podcast will be coming out on Thursday afternoon, but go check out Thursday morning's show. Specifically that last hour with former Vol running back Jabari Davis. I thought he did a fantastic job on the radio with you guys. He talked about, specifically when he was talking about the 2001 Florida game down in Gainesville. Ben, before we kind of get to this weekend's game, I want to hear from you for a little bit because you didn't get to talk a whole lot during that show, especially that part of the show there. But I thought that was he gave some really cool insight to kind of the preparation for that game that week, because obviously that year you had the game moved back to December 1st because of the tragedy of the events of 9/11 that happened in September before Tennessee played in Florida. I thought he gave just a really interesting insight to that when the game got moved and how Philip Fulmer and the coaching staff handled that entire week, and then the week of the actual game again in December, that the whole emotions and stuff before the game, during the game, after the game, when they were all convinced they were going to go to the Rose Bowl. Just want to get your thoughts on that because I knew you didn't really get a chance to actually share that on Swain's show, so I thought give you a chance to talk about a little bit about that here before we get to going about this weekend's game.
No, I didn't have too much input into that. I mean, that was just one of those situations where you just sit back and you let Juice, aka Jabari Davis, just roll, and Swain kind of took the back seat on that as well. So I don't have a whole lot of thoughts on it. I thought it was cool. One of the things that I love to watch and listen to as a sports fan. I am a diehard sports fan, as many people know. I know you know this, Daniel, but I'll watch anything, anytime. It doesn't matter. I just love sports in general. So as a big time sports fan, I love the behind the scenes look at things, whether it be via watching something or it be just listening to it in audio format, podcast format, or on the radio. I love the Hard Knocks, the All or Nothing on Amazon Prime, the upcoming series on HBO with Washington State and Florida. I'll be tuned into those. I just love the behind the scenes look, because we always, as fans, wonder, like, okay, what are the players thinking? What does a team meeting look like? What does the preparation in the locker room before the game look like? So I'm a huge fan of behind the scenes, peeling that curtain back, and that's what we got today with Swain and Jabari. It was cool. We talked more so about it off air, but it was funny to hear those guys talking about conditioning after the show was over too, and just comparing today's workouts to their workouts when they were playing. So that was pretty cool. That was off air. But in those situations, you just kind of sit back and you let Jabari roll, or whoever's on, whether it be Fred White or Leonard Little or Al Wilson, one of those guys are on. You just kind of set them up and you just let them go. So it was really cool to hear those stories and hear the behind the scenes and hear Jabari talk about the party and on campus and in Knoxville. And I say party, it wasn't like a house party. It's just a party in the sense of all of Knoxville was celebrating. Knoxville was throwing a party, and to hear him talk about everybody who showed up to the track after the game. Jabari said 20,000 people, 5,000 people at the airport. So things like that, it was just really cool to hear.
Yeah, I always love listening to more players talk about time, like you said, just kind of any sport really, but specifically with Tennessee football and basketball and stuff too. It's always really cool to hear those stories and get those behind the scenes stuff. And yeah, when he was talking about the celebration at the airport, the celebration at Tom Black track on campus, it made me just sit there and pause for a second what I was doing and think, man, I mean, if Tennessee ever gets back to a point where they're actually competing for something now, I mean, I can't imagine what the celebrations and stuff would be like now, because it's, back then fans are used to it, and you still had 20,000 people showing up to celebrate Tennessee potentially playing for a national title. Obviously they didn't. They ended up losing to LSU in the SEC championship game. But I mean, with the last decade plus of just being beat down and just bad football, it makes me wonder, if Tennessee here in the next 3-4 years or so, if they get to a point where they are playing late in the season, and whoever they're playing, whether it's Missouri, Kentucky, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, whoever they play and they beat to clinch the SEC East, because I mean, surely it'll happen at some point in the next 5-10 years, but whenever it does happen again, it just makes me wonder what the celebration and stuff will be like then, because it's been so long. I mean, fans were waiting and just salivating to celebrate in 2016, and then that didn't happen. So it made me wonder, if Tennessee goes on the road this weekend and gets the upset. Obviously, I don't think Tennessee is going to compete for the SEC, or really challenge for the SEC East this year. But I mean, if they go down and get that victory in the Gainesville, something they haven't done since 2003, I mean, it makes you think. I wonder how big of a crowd Tennessee's going to get at the airport, or when they get back to campus and stuff, because I think they'll get a pretty warm welcome back. As you saw, the basketball team this past year, and the year before last too, I mean, that they would get pretty sizable crowds welcoming back from the bus station, at the bus and everything like that when they get back to campus. I mean, and obviously the basketball team, the men's team, they achieved at a very high level over the last 2 years, and I think the Vol basketball fandom it's very underrated, but the football fandom is definitely larger. That's why you have 100,000 plus seat stadium here in Knoxville. So I'd be very intrigued to see if Tennessee pulls off the upset. I don't think it's going to happen, but if they do it, what that celebration is going to be like, and when Tennessee does get back to competing at a higher level than what they have been, what the celebrations and stuff will be like from the fan base. Because I mean, it was pretty. I mean, that 2016 Florida game in Knoxville, from what I remember being there and covering it and everything. I mean, I remember walking out onto the field after the game was over, and I mean, there were just fans they weren't leaving. They were staying in Neyland Stadium. They were staying in there to celebrate the team. But it was the same thing back in the 2015 Georgia game. I'll never forget that one too. A lot of the fans just sitting there celebrating with the players and not leaving because they didn't want to leave, because they hadn't seen that happen in a while. So I'll be very intrigued to see what happens this weekend. But we'll kind of transition now into that game, Ben, and I've already talked with Graham Hall. Hopefully all of you listening to this podcast have listened to that yet. If you haven't, just check it out. It's in their podcast tab. And the same way you can listen to this podcast. It'll be on iTunes, YouTube, all the other podcast things. I spoke with Graham Hall from the Gainesville Sun all about Florida. So he talks about, Kyle Trask, Emory Jones, Florida's defense, Florida's offense. We kind of went in depth about the injuries and stuff too, who he expects to play, who might be too banged up to play, and obviously, the suspensions and stuff too. So we talked in depth about that. So if you want a full breakdown of Florida, be sure to go and listen to that. But Ben, we're going to give, obviously Tennessee's perspective. You and I both cover Tennessee. I do for RTI, you do for RTI, and also for Swain. So we know what we're talking about here with Tennessee. From the Vols side of things here, heading into this weekend's game, we're going to have our picks and our prediction panel on Friday. So I'm not going to give away, our score predictions, but I think everyone listening can, tell from me at least that I'm not feeling too hot about Tennessee's chances. But I do think, however, there are a lot of ingredients there for this upset. You have a noon kickoff, which I think will, as I spoke with Graham Hall about, I think it's going to be probably not a sellout in the Swamp. I don't think. I think it's going to be a little bit more of a muted, controlled crowd. Tickets are going pretty cheap from what I've seen, so that's a little, at least cheaper for what they usually do for SEC contests. So that was a little surprising to me. It's a noon kickoff. Jarrett Garantano typically plays better on the road. I mean, he doesn't light up the stat sheet, but he's played better on the road so far in his Tennessee career than he has at home. Florida secondary is definitely the weakness on defense, so that would bode well as long as the offensive line can do enough to stop a pretty good Florida pass rush. You've got those two factors, and you've got the fact that I think Jeremy Pruitt, he said it, Ben, he hates Florida. We actually had to hear him say, and yes, I hate Florida on Vol calls. I do think, aside from maybe Auburn, I don't know that Pruitt hates another team more than Florida, because You look at it, he's coached at Florida State. He's coached at Georgia. They played him while he's at Alabama, too. He coached against Dan Mullen while he's at Alabama. And now he's at Tennessee. I don't think you could find a school, like I said, except maybe Auburn, that Pruitt hates more than Florida. And obviously Tennessee players and fans hate Florida, and there's a lot of them who hate Florida more than Alabama, but those are kind of 1A, 1B. But Ben, for this weekend, what are you wanting to see in this game for the Vols? Because I want to see, obviously I think the effort's going to be there. I would be stunned at this game if they had a Georgia State type effort. I think you'll see the effort you saw against BYU and for them being energized on the sideline, especially in that first half. But I want to see in this game, I want to see Tennessee, well, for one, take care of the football because they didn't last year against Florida. But I also want to see better executions in two phases of the game. That's third down and red zone, because Tennessee hasn't been super great on third down on offense, and they've had to settle for far too many field goals in the red zone so far this season, especially against I guess FBS competition, because Georgia State isn't Power 5, but against FBS competition, Tennessee's only scored 4 touchdowns and 8 red zone attempts, and all season they've kicked 4 field goals and 12 total red zone trips, which is not what you want to do. So I think for me, two of the main things I want to see are converting and getting touchdowns in the red zone, and actually being able to pick up third downs and kind of make it manageable. Try not to have too many third and longs. Get more than 4 or more yards on your first down play to get yourself in winning position on second down. So those are kind of the two of the main things I want to see, besides some of the more obvious stuff as well.
Yeah, I think the main thing for me is just see Jarrett Guarantano play well, because if Jarrett Guarantano plays well against BYU, Tennessee's sitting at 2-1 right now. I don't think, obviously Jarrett could have played better against Georgia State to begin the year, but Jarrett wasn't the sole reason that Tennessee lost that football game. But a lot of people want to point to Alontae Taylor and his gaff on the final drive against BYU, the 64-yard completion to set BYU up for the game-time field goal and send it to overtime. A lot of people want to blame Alontae Taylor for the loss because of that. But if Jarrett Guarantano handles his business throughout the course of that game, if he identifies the open receivers sooner and gets the ball out sooner and doesn't hold on to the ball too long and doesn't throw a bad interception, then Alontae Taylor is never in that situation to make that mistake. That game should have been well out of hand before it even reached that point. So if JG can see those open wide receivers much more often against Florida, which I thought he did a really good job of doing so against UTC. Now, granted, it was against UTC. As I said on the podcast earlier this week, there's a huge asterisk next to that because it's UTC. They're an FCS opponent, and that's how JG should look. But even against UTC, he saw the receiver open early and he got rid of the ball. He wasn't doing that against BYU. So even though it's a step down in competition, that's a step in the right direction for JG. So if he can play well against Florida, I really like Tennessee's chances of pulling off the upset. The reason I'm hesitant to say that I like Tennessee's chances is purely that. Is because of the play of JG. But also, I'm putting a lot of the game on JG's shoulder. I think JG could play a C-plus game and Tennessee could win if the rest of the team, primarily the Tennessee's front seven, if Tennessee's front seven played an A-plus game and JG played a C-plus game, then I think Tennessee could win. But if JG plays a C-plus game and Tennessee's front seven plays a C game, then Tennessee is not going to win on Saturday. So I just, went on a long monologue about how JG needs to perform really well against Florida. I started with that, but I also think it's more important for the front seven to play well. I trust JG more than I trust the front seven because the defensive line to begin the year has been abysmal. Even against UTC, they didn't do a whole lot. There's a lot of talk all summer long about getting Aubrey Solomon eligible, and he hasn't done a single thing in the first 3 games. I mean, he's made a tackle here and there, but I forgot he was on the team after talking about him all summer long. So he needs to step up, whether it be Greg Emerson or Matthew Butler or somebody else along the defensive line has to step up. I didn't think they looked good against UTC. When Tennessee was in the backfield, it was because Henry To'oTo'o was getting back there. It was because the outside linebackers were getting back there. So I actually think this game is going to come down to how well Tennessee's defensive line plays. I trust the linebackers somewhat. I like Daniel Batuli and Henry To'o up the middle. I think Daryl Taylor is on the verge of a big game. Now they need somebody to step up opposite of Daryl Taylor, whether it be DeAndre Johnson, Kevon Bennett, or whether maybe it's one of the young guys, Roman Harrison or Kavarius Crouch. Crouch has played more and more as each game has gone along, and Pruitt continues to say he's closer and closer to being ready to accepting a full-time role within the defense. Maybe that's this weekend that Crouch steps up and makes some big plays. So Tennessee needs the defensive line to step up and have a really solid game, and they need somebody to step up outside of Daryl Taylor, opposite of Daryl Taylor, if they want to pull off this upset, because Florida's offensive line, I wouldn't say that they are weak, but it is the weakness of the offense, if that makes sense. Florida's wide receivers are tremendous. I actually think Kyle Trask is better than Felipe Franks. There's a small sample size, so I could be proven completely wrong on this, but based off of the sample size that I have, I thought that Florida's offense looked much more efficient with Kyle Trask leading the way than I did Felipe Franks. I mean, Florida's offense in that fourth quarter was just a completely different offense than it was the first three quarters under Felipe Franks. And on top of that, I thought Kyle Trask showed 10 times more leadership than I've ever seen from Felipe Franks over the course of his career at Florida. So I actually think that Florida is in a better position offensively with Kyle Trask at quarterback. I'm not buying the whole two-quarterback system that Dan Mullen continues to throw out. Will we see Emory Jones? Yes. So I guess technically you could see a two-quarterback system, but in my mind, a two-quarterback system is where, the two quarterbacks are receiving the same amount of reps or close to the same amount of reps, and I don't think that is going to happen. I think there will be run packages for Emory Jones, but I don't think he's going to be the primary quarterback. I think that is going to be Kyle Trask. So I think Florida is somewhat strong at quarterback. I think they're very strong at wide receiver, and I think that they are pretty strong with LaMichael Pirine at running back, although he has gotten off to a slow start this season. So the weakness is that offensive line. Although they are not necessarily weak in general, Tennessee has to take advantage of that. But what's unfortunate is what you need to take advantage of a weak offensive line. Tennessee isn't necessarily strong in that area, that being the defensive line. So Tennessee's linebackers are really going to have to come ready to play and kind of make up for what the defensive line lacks.
I think the obvious choice for this next question I would ask is Jarrett Garantano, and that is, who's the one player you're going to watch the most. So I'm going to take him out of the equation here. Aside from Jarrett Garantano, it can be offense, it can be defense, or if you want to give one of both, then I'm fine with that too. But aside from him, who is the one player you're watching the most in this game, Ben, and the one you want to see the most from? Because I look onto the offensive side. To me, I'm not going to cop out and say the entire offensive line, but I am going to say the three young, inexperienced guys in Wanya Morris, Darnell Wright, and Kayron Calvert, because I do trust, obviously, Trey Smith to play well in this situation. I think Brandon Kennedy, he's shown after he knocked off some of the rust, he's been a good, capable starter at center for Tennessee. But this will be Wanya Morris, assuming he starts. If he doesn't, it'll be Jimmer Johnson, but Morris is still going to play in this game. But either way, it's going to be Morris, Wright, and Calvert's first actual road action, and it's going to be in the swamp. It's going to be against, maybe not the best Florida defensive line, period, but obviously Zuniga is really good. But they have a really good linebacking core, and we saw Florida get 10 sacks against Miami. They obviously were only held to 1 sack against Kentucky, but Kentucky has a really good offensive line. Miami was starting a lot of redshirt freshmen, a lot of young guys. Tennessee's offensive line is more akin to Miami's than it is to Kentucky's. So, to me, I'm looking at, like I said, it's a little bit of a cop-out because it's not just one guy, but I think the players I'm looking at most on offense specifically are those three young linemen and how they are going to handle what's going to be thrown at them against Florida, because so far this season, I mean, Tennessee's tackles and interior guys too, but none of the offensive line has faced really an NFL defensive lineman. And Jabari Zuniga is definitely an NFL defensive lineman. There's NFL caliber players on Florida's defense, all kind of scattered all across all three levels of the defense there. To me, those are three guys on offense, and then on defense, the one guy I'm really going to be watching, I want to say Daniel Batuli, but I really honestly, I'm going to say Alontae Taylor, because he's not had a great start to his sophomore season. And if Bryce Thompson does play, that's going to take some of the pressure off of him. And really, I don't know if he'll even start because he did start last weekend against UTC. Maybe that was kind of a wake-up call for him. Maybe he had a better week of practice, and he goes out and he does start, and it's going to be him and Warren Burrell and maybe Kenneth George Jr. will be the nickel guy. But I want to see Alontae Taylor because he will have moments where he's playing really well and he's playing smart. But then, I mean, as you alluded to earlier, Ben, I mean, he had that just huge gaffe against BYU. And that's not the only one. He's had a couple other times this season, whether it was against Georgia State or against BYU or even against UTC when he was in there. I mean, he still played quite a bit against UTC, even though he didn't start. He's just not been the same guy he was last season. And last season, I mean, he had struggles, but that's to be expected. He's a true freshman who's never played the cornerback position until he got to college. And that's still, he's still learning. He's not a natural corner. He played receiver and quarterback. He played all in offense in high school. He was not a defensive back by trade. So I mean, it's still completely understandable. He's having some growing pains and some learning issues here. But I think he's kind of my main guy on defense because he's been a little bit of a weak point in the secondary that wasn't really expected coming into this season. So my guys I'm looking out for on offense are those three young linemen, and on defense I'm going to go with Alontae Taylor.
Yeah, offensively, I'm in the same ballpark as you are. How can you not keep an eye on the three young linemen, just the offensive line in general? They have gotten better game by game, especially in the running game. They're definitely better running the football in the running game than they are in pass protection. So that'll be something to watch, especially if it's 3rd and 7 or longer. Can the offensive line hold up long enough to where JG can sit back there and push the ball downfield? Because I do think Tennessee's receivers have an advantage, or Tennessee has an advantage with the receivers going up against Florida's defensive backs. That group is just thin right now. They're not the same defensive backs that we're used to Florida having, and there's a lot of young guys back there that Juwan Jennings, Marquez Callaway, Josh Palmer, even Brandon Johnson should be able to make some plays against. And then you also have Dominic Wood Anderson. So I expect for Tennessee's receivers to have a big game if JG performs well, if the offensive line gives JG enough time to get the ball downfield. So I think it's kind of hard not to single out the offensive line as being the one position that you were paying attention to the most. And if we had to go individually, I mean, I think it's got to be a tie between Wanya Morris and Darnell Wright and Kayron Cowart, just like you said. And what worries me is that you mentioned Miami gave up 10 sacks to Florida in the first game of the year. That was because they were starting 2 freshman tackles.
Yep.
Tennessee is starting a freshman at left tackle, a freshman at right guard, and then at right tackle is a redshirt sophomore who is essentially a freshman in terms of playing experience. That doesn't sound good, especially when you're going up against Jabari Zuniga and Jonathan Greenard, who are 2 NFL players. So unfortunately for Florida, but fortunately for Tennessee, it may be in Tennessee's best interest if Jabari Zuniga can't play, because that's one NFL front 7 member of the Gators defense that you don't have to worry about, one edge rusher that you don't have to worry about from a Tennessee standpoint. So it's hard not to look at that on offense for Tennessee as being the group that you're paying attention to the most, or the players that you're paying attention to the most. And then defensively, I think all eyes will be on Bryce Thompson just because he hasn't played in a while. But to me, I go back to kind of my previous answer, what we were talking about previously, and that is the defensive line. Tennessee's secondary hasn't been all that great. Tennessee's linebackers haven't been all that great at times outside of Henry To'oTo'o. But I said earlier, I expect them to play well with Darrell Taylor being on the verge of a big game, with Henry To'oTo'o just balling out. I think he's the best player on Tennessee's defense today, even with Daniel Batuli back in the mix. And then you do have a good linebacker in Batuli back out there playing, and he should play a lot of snaps. So I'm confident in Tennessee's linebackers, at least in the starting linebackers. If you have to dig deeper than those guys, I'm a little worried. And then in the secondary, yeah, Nigel Warrior had a pick last week, but I'm still not totally confident in him in big-time games going against somebody who isn't an FCS opponent. Trayvon Flowers has been the most disappointing member of the secondary this season. And so the season play. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Jalen McCullough thrown into the fire if Flowers gets off to a slow start. You've seen a lot of Theo Jackson. I thought Theo Jackson's been the best member of the secondary through 3 games this season. And then obviously you have a big boost in the secondary in Bryce Thompson. So I wouldn't say that I'm confident in the secondary because really nobody has played just exceptionally well, but they do have some pieces back there that can play well. Whereas, like I was saying earlier about the defensive line, what player do you expect to just have a big-time game? I mean, Aubrey Solomon is the big name, the former big-time recruit, but I don't have confidence in him having a big game, and I definitely don't have confidence in Greg Emerson or Matthew Butler or Savion Williams or any of those guys. I mean, there isn't a player along the defensive line right now that I just have the utmost confidence in going out and just dominating the line of scrimmage. And in order to win big-time football games in the SEC, you have to dominate the line of scrimmage. And unfortunately for Tennessee, they don't have any of those guys. So as a group, the group that I'm circling to keep my eye on is the defensive line, just because Tennessee has to have them play well if Tennessee is going to pull off the upset. And then individually, I guess I would circle Aubrey Solomon because there's a lot of hype about him coming into the season, and we talked about him every day throughout the offseason, throughout the summer, throughout fall camp until he became immediately eligible, and now we are not talking about him at all. And I think that is very telling. So I'm circling the defensive line, the offensive line, and then offensively I'm circling the young freshman, and then defensively I'm circling Aubrey Solomon.
Yeah, I think those are all good choices as well. And I like I mentioned, I do, I'll be interested to watch Daniel Batuli out there because he'll probably, he'll be healthier. They played him some against UTC, and I thought you saw a pretty big difference in Tennessee's defense with Batuli out there. So I'll be very interested to see how much more he plays against Florida and how much of a bigger impact he will have with Tennessee's defense against Florida's offense. Ben, just a couple more things I want to cover here before I get to an interview here I did with David Ubben of The Athletic. I think you guys will really enjoy the interview I did with him. It's not quite Florida specific necessarily, but it's about Tennessee specifically and things he saw on film with them when he got to spend a whole week with UTC's coaches. So I think that'll be an interesting conversation for you guys to get to listen to. Ben, we were asked in our weekly mailbag on RockyTopInsider.com a couple questions that I wanted to briefly go over here. It's about one about the offense, one about the defense. Defensively, we were asked, do we think Tennessee will turn up the pressure and send more blitzes Kyle Trask's way because, he's not super mobile, and he's a guy that, he's making his first career start since early in his high school career. Do we think, that Pruitt and Ainsley are going to turn up the heat and send more blitzes? And then offensively, do we think Jim Chaney, and I think we mentioned T. Martin as well, do we think they will kind of open up the offense a little bit more and let Jarrett Garantano throw the ball some because of Florida having a weaker secondary, and also just kind of get some more dynamic plays out of the offense? I think offensively, I think you'll see them air out more. I don't know if that you'll see what they did against Auburn and attacking the sideline and they don't get 30-40 yards downfield as often as they were. But I think you might see maybe closer to what you saw with the South Carolina game last year, in the fact that I think because of Tennessee's offensive line and because of how good of a pass rush Florida can get, I think you got to attack that aggressive defensive mindset by the Gators with screens, with the draw plays, and with some quick passes. And you have the running backs to do that. You have Ty Chandler and Eric Gray, who are dangerous out the backfield. Tim Jordan's a better pass catcher than people think as far as a running back goes. And you have some guys who you can utilize, the younger guys like Cedric Tillman and Ramel Keaton, who you don't have a bunch of play calls for them, or even Jacquez Jones too. You don't have a bunch of play calls for them, but they've got the speed and they've got the type of play, or Cedric Tillman doesn't necessarily have the speed, but Keaton and Jones do. They have the type of speed where you can give them, or maybe in Cardin fills me because it looks like he's healthy enough to play this weekend. You can use those guys like you did in that South Carolina game on those jet sweeps, on those end arounds, and reverses and things like that, and maybe get to the edge, because it's going to be really tough to get to the edge against Florida. You got to the edge consistently against BYU because BYU's just slower and smaller, or I guess slower and smaller both than what Tennessee was and what Florida is. So I don't know how often you're going to be able to get to that edge against the Gators, because they have really good defensive speed, and that's probably the biggest thing that stands out about them when I watch them on during games and stuff, was how just fast overall Florida is at the skill positions on offense and defense. And defensively, I think Tennessee was going to blitz a lot anyway because, as you just mentioned there, the defensive line, and they just haven't been very effective this year. Tennessee's had to bring pressure even against Georgia State, and they didn't do it a whole lot against UTC, but they've done it more in the first 3 weeks of the season than I thought maybe they would because, the defensive line just hasn't been a big difference maker. You've been having to, send Darrell Taylor, you send DeAndre Johnson, send Quavaris Crouch, send even defensive backs to blitz. And I think Tennessee is consistently having to send an extra guy or two on blitzes because the defensive line just isn't getting that push that you need. So I just kind of rehash the answers there, and people listening to this might have already read the mailbag, but I wanted to go a little more in depth there. But Ben, I want to hear your thoughts on that too. On offense, do you think we'll see Garantano in this offense play more like Auburn last year, play more like South Carolina, or at least maybe air it out a little bit more than what they have this season? And then defensively, how aggressive do you think Pruitt and Ansley are going to be against this Florida offense?
I think Jarrett Garantano and the offensive line will dictate how often Jim Chaney and T. Martin try to push the ball downfield. I think it's as simple as that. I think, especially in the BYU game, Jim Chaney tried to open up the offense late in the second quarter, beginning of the second half, but JG just was not executing. And if you aren't executing, they're going to call the most basic plays possible. I think it's as simple as that. They're not going to run plays that they don't trust you to execute. And JG was not executing in the BYU game, which is why you kind of saw a limited play sheet, I guess you could say, a limited amount of calls. That's why you saw nothing but, stretches to the left, stretches to the right to Ty Chandler and Eric Gray in the second half. So you had two tight ends with Austin Pope and Dominic Wood-Anderson come in motion, and then they would run off tackle. They did that 11 straight plays to one side or the other, or they would mix in the halfback toss. So that was a result of JG not executing. And then in the Georgia State game, the offensive line was not executing. And I think the plan was vanilla anyways. The goal wasn't to open it up a whole lot in the Georgia State game because you didn't want to show BYU a lot. You didn't want to show Florida a lot. But even so, the offensive line was not executing enough to where Jim Chaney could call plays where Jawan's going downfield, where Callaway's going downfield, and where Palmer's going downfield because JG doesn't have time to sit there and let the play develop and let them get downfield because he's being pressured. So I think first quarter execution will determine how much the playbook is opened up. If JG and the offensive line is rolling in the first quarter, then I think you'll see everything Tennessee has. I think you'll see everything Jim Chaney has in his playbook because Tennessee has to win this game in a way. So if Jim Chaney senses that he can win this game and his quarterback is executing early on, if his offensive line is executing early on, then I think you'll see a lot. I think you'll really see the ball pushed downfield. And then I also think they'll still try to establish the run just because you have to do that in any football game. So I think JG and the offensive line will dictate how much the playbook is opened up. And then defensively, of course, I think Jeremy Pruitt and Derek Ansley is going to be aggressive. It's in Jeremy Pruitt's nature. He talks about being aggressive literally every single week. And last week during ball calls, he joked that some fans probably get mad at him for how aggressive he is. So I think regardless of the players who are on the roster, Pruitt is going to be very aggressive. I just kind of think it's in his nature, and especially with a Florida offensive line that has struggled to begin the year and a first-time starting quarterback, I definitely think he and Ansley will be aggressive. It's simply in his nature to be aggressive. He doesn't know any other way to coach. So I think you'll see plenty of blitzes. I think you'll see linebackers blitzing. I think you'll see corner blitzes. I think you'll see Schamberger coming off the edge from his nickel position. I could see Warrior creeping down in the box and maybe coming on a blitz or two. If Bryce Thompson is playing, you'll definitely see a Bryce Thompson blitz or two. So I definitely think Pruitt will be aggressive calling plays.
Well, Ben, I'm not going to give a prediction here. Like I said, we have our game picks on RockyTopInsider.com on Friday. But I'll say I think an upset can happen. Doesn't mean I'm going to pick it. And as you said in the mailbag too, someone asked us, are they just preparing themselves for another heartbreaking loss? And you said it. I think you said it well, Ben. That the fact that Tennessee has a legit shot of being able to pull off this upset because of the noon kickoff, because of some injured Florida players, because of matchups Tennessee has in their advantage. People are going to get their hopes up. Maybe they won't get them crushed. I don't know. I would like to see Tennessee be able to come out and get that victory, something they haven't done, like I said earlier, since 2003. I was 10 years old the last time Tennessee won in the Swamp. I am now 26. It's been over a decade and a half since Tennessee was able to get a victory in the Swamp, and a lot of those games haven't been super close. The last two have, and the last two have been extremely heartbreaking for Tennessee fans the way they've gone. But before that, I mean, you had a 39-point loss in 2007. You had, I think, the other games in 2009, 11, and 13. Those are all double-digit losses. And obviously, the 2009 one was a little different because that was a number one Florida team that Tennessee was a 30-point underdog against and kept it a 10-point game there at the end. But they still, it was not really close the entire game. It was more of Tennessee was kind of mucking it up and made it ugly and, made Florida frustrated. But Tennessee didn't really threaten to win that game. They gave Florida a lot of a good matchup there. But Ben, I don't think it's going to happen. I want to ask before we close out the thing here, the podcast here, what percentage chance are you giving Tennessee of pulling off the upset? Because I'm going to go, while I think they have a chance, I'm still going to go very low because I've been very conditioned not to believe in Tennessee getting victories down in the Swamp. I'm just going to go 15%. But I'm curious what kind of percentage you would give Tennessee of pulling off the upset this weekend.
I would give Tennessee a 37% chance of winning. We'll go Peerless Price's number. I don't think it's a great chance, but there is a recipe for success, and it's what every coach would say. It sounds super cliche, but it's the truth. It's not turning the football over. Tennessee was blown out last year, but obviously if Tennessee doesn't turn the football over 6 times, and Florida didn't turn the football over, that's the recipe for a blowout right there. So if you reverse that trend and Tennessee forces two turnovers and doesn't turn the football over, it is 100% going to be a close game. If you told me right now that Tennessee wasn't going to have any fumbles, if JG wasn't going to have any interceptions, and Tennessee was able to generate a sack fumble from Darrell Taylor, or Bryce Thompson was able to pick off a pass, and the turnover margin is 2-0 in Tennessee's favor, I 1,000% think that it's coming down to a Brent Samaglia field goal or maybe a Florida field goal. So turnovers, special teams, Tennessee has been tremendous on special teams regardless of the record. So turnovers, win the special teams phase of the game, and the defense just be lined up correctly. Just be lined up correctly and give yourself a chance to make a play, swarm to the football, and get pressure on Kyle Trask. If you can do those three things, play sound football and defense, don't turn the football over, and win the special teams, I like Tennessee's chances of winning. But unfortunately, Tennessee has not done a lot this season to make me think that they will actually do that in the game. And Florida is going to be the best team that Tennessee has faced to this point in the season. And as I said earlier, what Florida doesn't do well offensively, which is their offensive line up front, Tennessee doesn't have the players to take advantage of that. Whereas offensively for Tennessee, the weakness of the Florida defense is its secondary, and that's the strength of Tennessee's offense. It's wide receiver play. So there's potential to make plays there, but I don't think if Callaway and Palmer and Jennings, if they don't have a big game, it's going to be because the offensive line didn't give JG enough time to get them the ball, or it's going to be because JG played like he did against BYU. So I don't think that the chances are great because, as I said earlier, in order to win in the SEC, you have to play really well along the line of scrimmage, defensively and offensively. I have zero faith in Tennessee's defensive line, quite frankly. They just have not shown me anything, literally anything. They have not shown me anything this season. All of Tennessee's front seven success has come from the linebackers. So I don't trust Tennessee's defensive line whatsoever. I do feel somewhat good about the offensive line, so that makes me feel a little bit better, but I would say Tennessee's chances of pulling off the upset because of the line of scrimmage play and maybe because of some inexperience on the defensive side of the ball is probably around 40%.
Well, there you have it, folks. Like I said, we'll have our game predictions, and I don't know. The more I think about it, sometimes I'll sway back and forth between, hey, maybe Tennessee will pull this upset, and also thinking maybe they won't. So to me, it's been all week. I've kind of stayed on the more negative side of thinking they'll pull off the upset, but I've had different moments of thinking, hey, maybe it can happen. But we'll have our game prediction stuff. We've had all kinds of other pieces about Florida and Tennessee this week, and we'll have on a Thursday night and through Friday, we'll have an opponent preview about Florida, kind of breaking down the Gators. We'll have our game predictions. We'll have our buy or sell. I'm going to do a kind of 5 big storylines to watch for the game, how to watch the stuff too. Obviously, we'll have that posted Friday night for you to, get on the information you need to watch it on TV, to stream it wherever you were, however you want to watch it. So we'll have all kinds of stuff for you. I've had quotes from Jeremy Pruitt, quotes from Dan Mullen, all this week quotes from players from Tennessee's side. So we've had all kinds of coverage for you this week. We'll continue to have coverage for you up until game time. Then obviously tons of stuff for you after the game as well. After on Saturday and Sunday both, we'll have all kinds of stuff for you about Tennessee, win or lose. But without further ado, ending for Ben McKee and I'm going to have my interview here with David Ubben of The Athletic, talking about the film study he got to see with Tennessee and kind of the tendencies and everything that got exposed, but what he saw with UTC's coaching staff, and just his thoughts on the season, the upcoming game as well, and his thoughts about covering Tennessee over the last year and a half. So here's my interview with David Ubben of The Athletic. And to have with me here today as a special guest on the RTI podcast, David Ubben. He is a Tennessee beat writer for Tennessee football for The Athletic. I've had him on here before. You guys probably know him if if you're a big fan of Tennessee football. You've probably seen David's work, and hopefully you're subscribed to The Athletic. But David, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast this week.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you had a piece. I mean, you've actually written several really good pieces this season, but especially in this past week. If you all haven't subscribed to The Athletic, you absolutely should. And one piece in particular that I want to reference here, that I thought you did just a phenomenal job on, David, was you got to go spend a week with UTC and then spend a week with their coaches, and you actually get to watch what they do and how they prepare for teams, specifically against Tennessee, and watch them with film study and stuff. And I don't want to give away too much about your article, because obviously I want people to go and subscribe to The Athletic if they haven't already, and read it and check out your work. But there was some very interesting stuff in there in your article, stuff that the coaches were saying, that when Tennessee lines up in this formation, they're running 83% of the time in this direction, why they were able to kind of pick on a little bit with Warren Burrell and kind of figure out things out there. But I'm curious, with your time there with UTC and their coaches, what was the biggest thing you learned about Tennessee? Because I saw you mention that, in that 1 week with UTC, you learned more about the Tennessee football program than your entire first year, covering them, because you actually got to, go behind the scenes a little bit and see some stuff. And we don't get to do that at Tennessee. But I am curious, what was the biggest thing you learned from all that film study and film analysis of Tennessee's football program?
I think just watching a coaching staff, sort of game plan and figure out, okay, here's what they do poorly, here's what they do well. Sort of watching the process. I think everyone sort of basically knows how a game plan comes together, but that was my first time really getting to sit and actually see guys put it together and say, well, here's the packages that we have, and on their whiteboard in their defensive coaches meeting room, they have, 5 different calls for 11 personnel and 7 different calls for 12 personnel, and sitting down with Joe Pizzo as he sort of puts together the final touches of the offensive game plan, and he's like, on third, I think it was sitting down with him Thursday. Yeah, we're in our third and long situations. He's like, I want to get, these plays, and he added 4 or 5 different plays to the giant wall size Google sheet that will become the laminated, Denny's menu on game day. So, sort of watching them say, okay, here's what we do, and here's how the things that we do can attack what Tennessee does, and those kind of things. It was interesting to watch that sort of come together. And then additionally, just sort of how kind of basic what Tennessee had done for the first couple games was. I think Chattanooga figured out pretty quickly, hey, Tennessee's treating these games like the preseason and sort of trying to figure out themselves. And I think you're going to see a different version of Tennessee with a lot more wrinkles and probably a little bit less predictable. When the season comes in, will that mean more effective? We'll see. But Tennessee didn't hide a lot of what they were doing on either side of the ball. And and Chattanooga's coaches, of course, picked up on that. But, as they obviously saw on Saturday, it's Jimmy's and Joe's, not X's and O's, and if you don't have the personnel to do it, it doesn't really matter how well you scheme anything, really.
Yeah, well, my biggest takeaways from your piece, and you also had a follow-up piece about some extra kind of insights from what you saw with UTC. But from the first story that I'm talking about, one of my biggest insights from it was, some of the predictability of Tennessee, like you mentioned, on defense. Just I think the UTC coaches said almost every single time on second down they would blitz, whether it was a corner or a linebacker, but they would blitz almost every single time on second down. They also mentioned, when Austin Pope's in the game. Whatever side he's on, if they're probably running it to his side. A lot of the stuff, as you said, it seemed like Tennessee was very predictable and also kind of vanilla basic. But how much of the stuff that from what you saw with UTC on the film study, how much of it you think it was just Tennessee being basic, and how much of it is correctable, or how much of it do you think is just it is what it is with Tennessee?
Well, you got to do what you do. I mean, I don't think I think the story was interesting for fans to sort of get that perspective, but I think if the majority of Tennessee's coaching staff read it, I think they'd be like, yeah. I think it doesn't take a genius to see they run behind Austin Pope. I'm sure, plenty of other folks have sort of noticed that. And I think when you talk about blitzing from the field side on second down, that's actually a pretty interesting thing because, Joe Pizzo, their offensive coordinator at UTC, was basically saying, I'm sure they know this. They do this every single second down. He's like, I think it's one of those deals where they just feel like they can out-execute you. I think a good comparison is the pick and roll in basketball. You can know it's coming, but you're going to have to deal with it. And if you can't, it's going to be a problem. And so the flip side of that is, okay, well, can you do that, or is this defensive staff used to doing that with the kind of talent that Alabama and Georgia and Florida State had? Can they do that? Can they be that predictable with Tennessee's talent? It's easy to out-execute somebody when you've got, a 5-star linebacker coming off the edge. And if he gets hurt, you got another 5-star linebacker who has slightly less experience. Tennessee is not in that position right now. And so can you do that? Can you just be that predictable? I'm not sure. I'm not a football coach, but, I think these are interesting questions about sort of, where does the line between doing what you do and becoming too easy to scheme for is an interesting one that I don't think I really know the answer to.
Yeah, I think that's fair. No, one question I wanted to ask, and actually I had someone reach out to me to ask me about it because they said, their exact quote was, that article by Ubben was one of the best analysis pieces I've read. Why do I feel so much worse after reading it? And I think the point he was trying to make was, reading it, you got the sense that Tennessee was just really easy to dissect on film, and that their flaws were just, very apparent. But I'm curious, David. Obviously, you haven't had this type of experience with any other team, but I'm curious, just from your opinion on this. Do you think that how common do you think it is? Do you think it's just kind of a every coaching staff, and that was the UTC coaching staff. That wasn't even an Alabama or a Georgia coaching staff, or wherever you want to think of UTC's coaches. Obviously, they're not getting paid as much money and aren't thought of quite as highly as some of these other coaches in the SEC and the Big Ten. But do you think it is? I guess my question to try to maybe either alleviate Vol fans' worries or maybe play into it a little bit. How common do you think it is for that to happen, where it's just the tendencies are that kind of apparent on the film? Do you think Tennessee's kind of an aberration? Do you think they're that bad or whatever, or is it just kind of you think that just is what it is, and every coaching staff in the country, no matter if it's Alabama or Georgia, they're going to be able to pick out those things on film and figure out hey, this is what they're doing, or is it more just kind of a unique Tennessee thing?
Well, I don't know that there's a hard answer to that question, because there'd be it's sort of, and also you're kind of speculating as well in terms of kind of what everyone else is doing. I would say, if I was guessing, Tennessee's probably on the slightly more predictable side, but also UTC really only studied the first couple games of the year on defense, and they looked a little bit back to Vanderbilt last year toward the end of the week, and then on offense they studied the first 2 games of the year. And they studied Jim Chaney's work at Georgia last year in the SEC championship game and the LSU game. So I think if you're looking at a full season, you might be seeing something a lot more different. Ultimately, this is why coaches talk about execution so much, is you're not going to be fooling everybody on every play. You're not going to go into a game ever or the coaching staff just has no idea what's happening. You talk to players all the time after games. They said, we knew every play that was coming, but if you can block it and you can execute it, you can time it well, and you got guys who can run routes and execute blocks, it doesn't really matter. You might catch someone, off guard a handful of times a game, but ultimately, especially, to look ahead to a matchup like Tennessee has this weekend with Florida, Jerry Pruitt and Dan Mullen have faced off so many times that they know what's coming. It's just about who's got better players, who executes, and who makes plays. And so, you don't want to be too predictable, obviously, but I think also Tennessee hasn't shown a ton through 2 games. They weren't going to show a lot of new stuff against Chattanooga. Chattanooga's coaches knew that. They worked on a handful of sets where they said they told their players, you're probably not going to see it, but we got to prepare for it just in case. But that's not going to be the case when Tennessee plays some bigger games like Florida. I think you're going to see them buck some tendencies this week. Every team has tendencies. How you play into those or how you use those against an opponent, I think in a lot of ways is how you can get a coaching staff when you talk about, we got out-coached today. And so to answer your question, it's complicated. I think, from what they saw, it's probably a little bit predictable. But again, if you can execute well, it doesn't matter. And later in the season, it might look a lot different.
Well said. That's a very well said point. To kind of switch gears a little bit, from that piece to kind of this season in general and your thoughts on the team, how surprised have you been by this start? Because, obviously none of us, media, fans, anyone, saw really this 1-2 start coming out. I think most people thought worst case scenario, Tennessee, kind of worst case realistic scenario, I thought Tennessee would be 2-1 heading into the Florida game. But here we sit, Tennessee's 1-2 after, just a disastrous loss to Georgia State. And they look, better with an effort perspective and everything against BYU. Excuse me, I think it said Georgia State earlier. I'm not sure. But either way, they're 1-2 right now, with the only one being against an FCS school. How shocked were you after the Georgia State game, and just kind of how surprised are you still that Tennessee's sitting here 1-2 heading into Florida week?
Pretty surprised, but when you look at how it happened, it made sense. I think, a couple things on Georgia State. One, sitting and talking with Chattanooga, I think they sort of confirmed what I thought, which was Tennessee really was treating that like a preseason game. They're getting guys reps, they're trying to figure out who they are, and all of a sudden you end up in a fist fight. But Georgia State staff felt really confident going into that game. They felt like they could win the battle on the line of scrimmage, and then they did. That's not a good sign for Tennessee moving forward. But you had one team treating that like a scrimmage, and you had another team treating that like a Super Bowl. I'm not a huge body language guy. I think it can lie to you sometimes. But you didn't have to watch much of that game to know who was the more invested team, and that matters. I think Tennessee, like I said, Tennessee wanted to learn about themselves, figure out what they had. And I think sometimes when that's the plan going in and guys see how many you're playing so many defensive and offensive linemen and guys are getting in there before the game's out of hand, I do think there's something to be said for that can bleed down to a roster of players that maybe says, well, we're going to treat this like a scrimmage as well. When you get into a fourth quarter, all the pressure is on a team like Tennessee, and Georgia State looked looser and more invested. And again, they felt like they had some good matchups, and they exploited those. People want to say, well, you only hear about that after the fact. I can tell you Chattanooga's coaches did not feel great about their matchups, but Rusty Wright, Chattanooga's head coach, who was on Georgia State's staff, we talked a little bit, they did feel good. And he said as soon as he saw, early in the game, he said Tennessee's in for a fight today, and he felt like the game was over, after that drive that Georgia State had to take the lead at the opening drive of the second half. And so, the Georgia State game was shocking in the moment, but when you look back on it and you start to kind of do the math of kind of what I just explained, that if that exact scenario plays out a bunch of times, I think Tennessee loses that game a bunch of times. I think they would have taken a different approach if they had it to do over again, but there's no do-overs in college football.
Nope, there's definitely not. After that game, though, like I said, Tennessee gave a better effort against BYU. They ultimately came up short because for some reason Garantano, showed a lot of regression in that game, didn't play well, and then you had obviously the defensive bust late in the fourth quarter. Tennessee couldn't hang in both overtime periods and ended up losing. And then the Vols came out and did what they needed to do and took care of business against UTC. Is probably obviously the best they've looked all year. I don't feel like we know a great deal about this team. I don't feel like, obviously, that Georgia State team is who they are, but I don't feel like, I don't feel like we've seen maybe the true Tennessee football team yet. What is your feel for the rest of the season, David? And I'll ask this question and then one more, but what is your feel kind of for the rest of the season? Because I think, obviously, the matchup against Florida is going to tell us a lot, but I'm curious kind of what you're expecting from this team in the final, 9 regular season games of the season.
Well, I mean, they're not good on either line, and that's the problem. The offensive line is better, but it's still, I think, below average, even though they're not getting Garantano just killed on every play. The running game, we'll see. They weren't great against Georgia State. They were good for most of the game against BYU, but then when the yards got tougher, they really didn't respond well to that, and they gave up tough yards defensively. I just think mathematically they're really behind the 8 ball. They might steal a game or two here or there, but it's pretty hard for me to envision a scenario where this team gets into a bowl game. I mean, it's looking a lot like 4-8 from where I'm standing. They're staring 1-7 in the face now with a tough schedule coming up, and Tennessee can beat Mississippi State or South Carolina. They have no chance to beat Georgia or Alabama. They need to catch some breaks and play perfectly to be in it late against Florida. But can you come home in those Mississippi State, South Carolina games, play well and get those wins and beat those teams? And then you go into November and you see what happens. Tennessee, they can win any of those games. But just pure mathematically, I mean, these games are going to be tight. And I'll be shocked if Tennessee gets to a bowl game at this point.
I'm right there with you. I'll be surprised if Tennessee gets to a bowl game. 6-6 would be after the 0-2 start would be a huge success for Pruitt and this staff and the players on the team too. But David, the last question I have for you here. Obviously, you've covered Tennessee now for a little over a year and a half, probably. You joined, I think it was the summer of 2018, heading into Pruitt's first year as well. I know when we talked with you here in the podcast before, when I've talked with you in person about things you've been told and the expectations. I mean, you joined right after obviously the huge Schiano mess and the coaching search of 2017. From what you were told about coming and covering Tennessee, and from just people who've covered Tennessee, from people outside of the Tennessee beat or whatever, how is what's Tennessee lived up to? Have they lived up to the expectation you had? Has it been even crazier than you expected? I'm curious, just from someone who wasn't covering Tennessee for a long time and then has come here the last year and a half. What's Tennessee? Has everything covering on the beat lived up to what you thought it was going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think the program itself tends to have a penchant for the outrageous, and they've lived up to that. I think ultimately it's been cool to see the fan passion, and it's always just cool to be around a program that people really, really care about. And I was really impressed with the crowd at the Chattanooga game because I thought it was going to be pretty depressing, and it was not. I was surprised that fans showed up as much as they did. And then, of course, the BYU game, especially coming off the Georgia State game, that was really impressive. So just the loyalty of Tennessee fans to keep showing up after they really have not gotten a lot out of their investment in the program is impressive. And, they keep hoping and we're sitting here not quite out of September yet. And yet again, you can't help but feel for the Tennessee fans who are sort of feeling like, well, better luck next year.
Well, David, like I said earlier, I think you've done some great work this week, and I know you're going to have more plans for the coming days. And then especially, after Florida, the Florida game, I know you're going to have quite a bit of stuff as well. So let our listeners here know, where they can find you. They can obviously find your work on The Athletic, but, what to maybe keep an eye on in the coming days and weeks.
Yeah, we've got some cool projects this week, some cool stuff in the works as well. I'm kind of always working on 5 or 10 things, and so keep an eye out for those. But, The Athletic, we always got some promo codes going. You can find me on Twitter at David Ubben, UBBEN. I think we've got 40-some folks on our college football team, and we've got people covering every major pro sports team in North America. We just launched a UK branch of some of the best soccer writers in the world. So it's been cool to see. Fun times at The Athletic for sure.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining me, and I appreciate it.
Thanks. Anytime.